Welcome back, everybody, to the 2-on-1 Fast Break podcast. We're entering week 3 of the NFL action, which means we're rejoined in studio by our NFL handicapper, Dan Urda. Dan, did not lose a wager last week. How's it feel?
Feels great. Getting half of a win is awesome.
Yeah, it's certainly better than week 1.
But I got exactly what I wanted in last week. I watched a lot of football. I think I learned some things about the teams. Now, 2 games is still, of course, a very small sample size, and you still can't really say anything definite. But it was really nice just to watch the teams and learn a little bit more about the direction I think they're going. And as you'll see, it's led to me actually having some thoughts on the picks this week.
Twice as much information as you have after 1 week, though.
Yes.
So, much more valuable to have some footage to watch and get to really know what the teams are doing, because with all the changes that go on in the offseason and them not showing anything but vanilla formations and everything in the preseason, it's tough to know what to go off of. So
the teams still aren't even in a groove yet.
Yeah, it's really after the first month that you really get a feel for everybody. But certainly know a lot more than we did before last week, and I think your slate of picks that you have for everybody in week 3 is going to reflect that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting week. We have a lot of teams that I think most people would agree are superior in terms of talent, but the spot seems to favor the team who they're playing. So a lot of the good teams are on the road against those pesky little teams that people don't really look at as being that good, but it's just a really good spot for them to surprise.
So let's recap the week 2 half wager you had. You had Green Bay getting teased down as part of a 2-team teaser that you were leaving open, and that'll get closed out this week, as we'll talk about later. But actually didn't look so great for you early on. The Jets jumped out to a 21-3 lead there in the second quarter. Were you a little worried there at any point?
Well, I texted my boy Marty Morningweg and made sure that he took care of it for me and made sure that the Jets did not win the game. Which, in all seriousness, it was a very, very flat performance by Green Bay. We're going to talk about that more later today. But they were able to come away with a home victory against an inferior opponent like I thought they would. Were they down 21-3 at one point?
Yeah, 21-3. They actually came back, took the lead in the fourth, and the Jets, to their credit, did tie the game up at 24. But then they immediately, on the ensuing Green Bay possession, allowed the 80-yard touchdown to Jordy Nelson, beating the self-proclaimed best corner in the league, D. Milliner.
Yeah, and then they threw that touchdown pass that Marty Morningweg called a timeout before he did, right? Or was that in the third quarter?
I think that was early in the game.
But either way, it was a very impressive game pretty much by the Jets. But I teased it for a reason. I knew it was probably not going to be a blowout,
right.
But they were able to get the win at home like they should.
Okay, so that was one part of the 2-team teaser, which we will close out this week with Atlanta minus a half. So that is at 6.5. They're at home against Tampa Bay, and with the closing out the 2-team teaser, that gets them down to half a point.
Yeah, and a lot of people like the Falcons to win big here. I'm not huge on that. I think Falcons have a really weak run defense, and I think they're going to see a lot of Bobby Rainey and a lot of Doug Martin, who is healthy this week, even though the last couple of weeks, even when he's been healthy, he hasn't been good. So I'm not really trusting the Falcons to cover a full touchdown. But this is kind of similar to the Green Bay game. It's a home game against an inferior opponent led by a veteran quarterback, and I think that in general those teams can get at least the victory, if not the cover of the original spread.
Falcons at 1-1 now. They looked amazing their first week, at least offensively, against the Saints. That was at home.
Now it looks like the Saints just might not have a defense.
Yeah, they certainly struggled on the road against Cleveland. We will talk about the Saints coming up next. But then Atlanta, maybe lost some of their steam with the public after they had to go on the road, and they struggled against that Cincinnati defense. So
there's no shame in struggling on the road against Cincinnati. That defense is nasty.
Yeah, it's a solid team, especially at home. And so, if this was coming off week 1, I think the public would be a lot higher on the Falcons. But I think 6.5 is a pretty reasonable number, and then teasing it down to them just having to win the game.
It's going to be a last-minute Matt Bryant field goal for all I care. Just get the victory.
All right, so that's the first play for week 1. Moving on, you have a 3-team teaser. 2 of them involve week 3 action, and then the third leg, again, you're going to leave open for a future pick, similar to how you did with the 2-teamer last week.
I think a lot of people lose teasers because they think that they have to put in all the games at once, and then they're bound to pick a game that really doesn't offer the same kind of value as the other ones. So I really like these open teasers.
Yeah, you might see two that you really like, and then you think, oh well, I have to do something else here to close it out, and then that could get yourself in trouble, certainly. So just a microcosm of your overall betting strategy, just preaching patience and looking for the right spots and not necessarily forcing yourself to have action. So that the three-team teaser, the two legs you like this week, you have New Orleans down to a pick 'em. You had it when they were at -10. They're now at 10.5. So Saints at a pick 'em. They're at home against a Minnesota team, certainly with plenty of turmoil going on. And then the Patriots, you like them teased down to -4. So they're at -14. Also at home against Oakland, who arguably is the worst team in the league at this point. Patriots at 1-1. They've been a mixed bag so far this season, but against the Raiders at home, I think it's definitely the survivor favorite for everybody out there this week.
And this has all the makings of one of those games where Belichick just wants to come in and put up 50 points and shut everybody up against a bad team and just be the big bully that he can be.
It could be one of those running up the score 52-10 type wins that we've seen from him over the years.
Yeah, and I actually thought long and hard about laying the 14 points before deciding to do it this way in the teaser, just because the sharp in me would never allow laying 14 points in an NFL game. I do think that they completely destroy the Raiders here. The Raiders are just not a good team. And like you said, Saints in need of a win finally come home to play a team without Adrian Peterson. Matt Castle looked awful last week. And again, it's a tease number, so even if the Saints don't bring their A game, they still should be able to win a home game against a bad team.
That Vikings defense actually played pretty well last week against the Patriots. And talking about Matt Castle, he just didn't give that Vikings offense any chance to win the game. He had Patterson wide open down the left sideline going into halftime. That probably would have been a touchdown. Would have cut the game to 3 points. He missed him, and then instead they go for that field goal. Chandler Jones blocks it, returns it for a touchdown, and instead of it at least being a 7-point deficit going into halftime, suddenly the Patriots are 17. Completely different game.
Absolutely, and I would be a little worried. I'd be a little less likely to do this if they would do what I think they should do and go to Teddy Bridgewater at this point, but they don't seem ready to do so.
They don't seem inclined, no. Which, if you feel that it would be detrimental to put him in at this point, I don't disagree with sitting him, even if it would help your team win. Because you're not winning the Super Bowl this year if you're the Vikings.
Right. They did look kind of explosive and exciting in Week 1, though. If they had a quarterback who can get these guys the ball, they can win some games.
Right, but I think you have to put the long-term benefits of sitting versus throwing Bridgewater in right away. You have to weigh that more heavily than whether or not it'll help you this week. So that's the decision they have to make. I don't know if him getting game experience would be better.
I like that. It's not like Blake Bortles. If you put Blake Bortles in, you don't want your young quarterback getting sacked 8 times a game.
Yeah, exactly.
But they don't have those kind of offensive line problems. You know what? It's a moot point. They're not starting them, so might as well fade Matt Castle.
Okay, so Patriots at home -4 against the Raiders, and the Saints down to a pick 'em. We didn't really talk about the Saints. They have their 0-2. Or you just think this is their first game at home? That offense is completely different when they're at home in the dome, and so I guess you're not worried about the defense struggling against that Vikings offense without Peterson.
Not without Peterson. Right. And the Vikings are doing 2 things that I wouldn't do if I were the coach, but I'm not the coach. But they're starting Matt Asiata, who pretty much plows into the line of scrimmage and falls down. They got a dynamic guy on that team, Jerick McKinnon. They're not starting him.
Well, the Vikings do have a history of liking running backs who just plunge straight into the line after years of Toby Gerhart as a backup.
It's exactly what he's been doing.
Now he's plying that trade in Jacksonville too, similar results. But all right, so New Orleans at a pick'em and New England -4. That's 2 legs of a 3-team teaser. The third leg will remain open for a future pick. Moving on, we've got plenty of other picks this week. It's a full slate. Houston, you like -2 on the road against the Giants. We talked about last week, everything was pointing towards it being a spot to pick the Giants, and you just didn't want to do it because of how bad they looked week 1, and they looked just as bad week 2.
You know what? I actually think they're even worse than I did after week 1 because Eli Manning looked really good last week.
He did.
And even with Eli Manning playing a really good game, that team still, Victor Cruz dropped about 5 passes. Rashad Jennings fumbled a ball when he wasn't even hit by a defender. I look at that team and I think so much of the 2012 Eagles when just everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The coach had lost the team. The players clearly were miserable on the field, and changes just needed to be made. And I think that's what, Tom Coughlin will always be a legend in New York, 2 Super Bowls. Eli Manning, say what you want about him. You can do the whole elite debate all you want, 2 Super Bowl rings. But that team is just not good. This is probably going to be a square play. I don't see the public jumping on the Giants right now, but sometimes the square sides win, and I think that Houston is that pesky team. We haven't seen a team like this since the early 2000s Ravens and early 2000s Buccaneers. They just have a great defense and a quarterback who just does enough to not lose the game. But they seem like they're going to be that kind of team, and I think they win this one.
So you're comparing Ryan Fitzpatrick to a modern-day Trent Dilfer.
Not a bad comparison.
I like it, yeah.
Brad Johnson, maybe?
Yeah. I must have missed the dream team talk about the Giants prior to this season. I think everybody pretty much expected them to be bad, and they are certainly living up to that billing. So, Houston -2 on the road in New York. Moving on, Detroit -2.5. You like that's at home against Green Bay. It's actually moved down to -2 since you got that pick in. So you talked about Green Bay looking flat in week 2 despite the win. Detroit certainly didn't look good at all, getting blown out on the road. But what do you see here?
Well, first off, whenever you take the Lions, you're pretty much playing Russian roulette because sometimes they can look incredible, and sometimes they can do what they did last week. But they're home again. I really feel like they're one of those teams that just feel a lot more comfortable at home. And Green Bay, 2 games, I have not been impressed in either one. Their defense looks terrible. Geno Smith was pretty much moving the ball up and down the field at will against them. And I actually should probably add the over this game. I'm not going to, but I think this is a shootout. But I think the Lions with the home field come out with the win, and I'll take it under a field goal.
Packers defense certainly hasn't looked great. Seattle marched the ball up and down the field against them. I know Green Bay was kind of a sleeper fantasy defense play last week at home against the Jets, and they did absolutely nothing. The Jets were able to move the ball, as you mentioned, throughout the game.
But that Jets offense, there was a time when an offense I don't think the Jets offense is anything special, but there was a time when offenses like that came into Lambeau and put up 10 points.
Right. I don't know what's going on. Peppers hasn't made the transition to linebacker.
He's also just old.
He's old. Matthews isn't the same impact player he was a couple years back.
And the defense was looking shaky, and then B.J. Raji got hurt, and now it's just a combination of not having talent and the guys who do have talent being hurt.
Yeah.
I think Stafford's going to look like he looked week 1. This is a very good spot for them, I think.
For me, this is a stay away just because, as you mentioned, you never know what you're going to get with the Lions. They're, in my opinion, the highest variance team as far as week-to-week performance as any team in the league. They can look like some weeks they play like they can beat anyone in the NFL, and you could talk yourself into them being a Super Bowl contender. And some weeks they put up 7 points like they did last week.
Well, I
never really know.
I certainly agree with that assessment. I just think at home against a weak defense is when you want to play them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you like Detroit -2.5. Moving on, Indy, the 0-2 Colts -7 on the road against Jacksonville. Jacksonville gave up 10 sacks last week against the Redskins, and they went out and cut their starting right tackle, Cam Bradfield, just because he was responsible for a good number of those 10. But my question is, if he won the job, how bad is the guy behind him that they're going to put in?
I don't see what you can't just find linemen off the streets and plug them in.
Yeah.
And I've watched football for a lot of years, and I put together this formula. The formula says if you can't stop anyone from sacking your quarterback and you can't score points yourself, you're going to get blown out a lot. I figured that out. It took me a lot of research.
Yeah. Is that one of those new advanced statistics?
It is.
Like some football sabermetrics?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it more because I don't think our listeners can understand it fully.
Probably proprietary information, too.
No, and if you The only time the Jaguars looked good was in the first half against the Eagles, and I think that was more the Eagles just laying a complete egg.
Foles treating the ball like it was covered in butter when he had it in the pocket.
Exactly, and there was a local reporter who did a breakdown of that game. Nick Foles probably should have thrown for 500 yards in that game if he hit his open receivers.
Every receiver was open.
So the Jaguars just can't cover anyone. Kirk Cousins threw the ball. They ran the ball well against them. The team's just bad, and it's not a sharp play to lay a touchdown on the road. So you're going to get people coming in saying, "Oh, the Sharps are all in Jacksonville." I think this team is put together to be blown out on a weekly basis.
The biggest weakness in that Colts team is obviously the pass rush and that defense overall, but going against the Jacksonville line and that's just the offense in general for the Jaguars would certainly seem to lend itself to the Colts at least having an average game defensively, and then with all the holes in the secondary for Jacksonville, I'd look for luck to be able to exploit those and really put up a big number for the Colts this week.
And this is another situation like the Saints, where an 0-2 team that was expected to be a playoff contender, they have to win. And the question is, do you trust the organization? Do you trust the quarterback? And I do trust Andrew Luck.
All right. So Indy -7 on the road against Jacksonville. And your final play of Week 3, just recently added, is St. Louis at home against Dallas at a pick'em. And I know there's some quarterback rumors out there which maybe lend yourself into this pick.
Well, yeah, there are rumblings coming out of Dallas that Tony Romo is, it's known he's banged up, but the rumblings are it actually might be a little more serious than people think. He didn't practice today, and at the same time, of all the games bet in Vegas right now, Dallas has the highest percentage of the public on them. However, the line moved from Dallas as a 1.5-point favorite to Dallas as a 1-point favorite, and now down to pick'em.
That's what we in the business call a reverse line movement.
That's the official term for it. And you know what? I could probably write an essay on why Dallas should win the game. They're doing a really good job running the ball, and St. Louis hasn't done a good job of stopping the run. Bobby Rainey had a great game against them. But a couple things here. First off, if Tony Romo plays, I don't trust Jason Garrett to stick to this run first. A leopard doesn't change his spots. Jason Garrett, a quarterback himself, it's been 2 seasons where when they run the ball with DeMarco Murray, they win, and he still hasn't committed to it. So I don't see any reason why the team would commit to that now. If Romo's out, that's a plus. And then let me tell you something about this Rams team.
All right, sorry, we had to pause in the action. We had an intruder in the official Philly Fast Break studios. So Dan, you were saying about...
Yeah, we had to pause in the middle of my sentence. I'm not sure exactly where I was, but I know I was talking about the Rams actually, even with Kellen Clemens as their quarterback, being a really good home team last year. They beat the Chicago Bears, putting up 42 points. They actually beat the New Orleans Saints at home, 27-16. And they actually, the Arizona Cardinals, who by all accounts should have made the playoffs last year if rankings were fair, they beat at home also last year. They're just a good home team. Jeff Fisher knows how to prepare the guys. And you know what? This year's Thad Lewis for me is Austin Davis.
You always have what is it about the unheralded third-string quarterbacks that you find a connection with?
Because I like the guys who haven't always been the man, who step up to the plate and do something well. And I love the dudes who look like Austin Davis. This guy was a walk-on in college at Southern Mississippi, and now he's starting in the NFL. That's kind of awesome. It's a good guy to root for, but you can't just bet with your heart. I like him. I like the fact that he's fiery. I like that he was running up and down the sideline screaming "F yeah" in his first NFL game. Like, that's the kind of dude. It's almost, dare I say, Tebow-esque, where the guy clearly doesn't have talent, but he fires up everybody around him to the point where they, even though it doesn't make sense, play a little better than they probably should. And I just like it. It's fun to watch. I think this is going to be an embarrassing game for the Cowboys. I think they're going to go in there thinking they have a win and leave the game 1-2.
All right. Do you like the Rams? So you like the Rams side even if Romo starts and plays?
I do think that there's value in the fact that it's become kind of trendy to not announce these quarterbacks being injured until Sunday morning. We saw it with Cam Newton week 1. We saw it last week with help me out here, Carson Palmer, and with Drew Sand starting. And I think that I think that there's something to this Romo injury. Same thing with Flacco. Flacco didn't practice today too. But Romo's the one who seems like the people around the Cowboys are chirping a little bit that this might not just be something he shakes off during the week and steps up. And maybe if he does play, he's still a little injured. So even if Romo plays, I'm keeping this pick. I do like the fact that I know I'm with the Sharps on this one. I don't usually bet games only because of that, but this is a gut call.
All right. So I would maybe wait till a little closer to game time and get a more definitive answer about the Dallas quarterback situation. Because I don't think the line would move that much, even if it was announced he was out. I think you can still get it -1, -2, and I think if you're looking for the Rams to win, you're not really worried about.
Well, it actually backfired on me. The line came out; it was -1.5, and I wrote a column for BookieSmash.com in which I cover the NFC East, and I put that as a play that I like the Rams. But I said I'm not going to bet it yet because I think the public's going to bet on Dallas, and that line's just going to go up. And I was like, I think I might be able to get 3 on this, and the opposite's happened. So I think I just want to get them now before it goes up any further. It's clearly that the public is going to be on Dallas, but the guys, the wise guys, as they say, are on the Rams.
All right. So that concludes the slate for Week 3. To recap, we have Atlanta -0.5 point closing out the teaser with the Green Bay winner from Week 2. We have a 3-team teaser with the Saints at Pick'em, New England at -4, and leaving the third leg of that open. We have Houston -2, Detroit -2.5, Indy -7 on the road in Jacksonville, and St. Louis at a Pick'em at home against the Cowboys.
See, some weeks we'll have no players, and some weeks we'll have a handful.
It's crazy. You never know. So moving on to our Outlet Pass segment, we've taken some reader questions. We do have a couple this week. One from KMac732 on Twitter. He asked, is Nick Foles just having a shaky start to the season, or is this the signs of him having the major regression that people worried about?
Why don't you go ahead and start?
All right, so obviously everybody knew going in the 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions from 2013. That was unsustainable. Nobody's going to have that good of a ratio. They're simply, teams are going to make plays. Everybody in the NFL is a professional. So on the defensive side of the ball, guys are going to make amazing plays, and some turnovers are going to happen. And we saw that last week against the Colts. Foles threw a decent deep ball down the sideline to Jeremy Maclin. It was a little bit underthrown, but it wasn't a terrible pass. But the corner's name escapes me for the Colts, but he made an amazing play on the ball, went up on it as if he was the intended receiver, and came down with a great pick. So that kind of thing didn't happen to Foles last year, and he escaped some fumble luck where a couple of his fumbles were actually recovered by the Eagles, so it didn't go down as a turnover. Stuff like that was bound to trend against him this season. What concerns me a little bit more is his completion percentage. It's only at 58% this year. It was at 64% last year. And it hasn't been a case of drops. The receivers have generally been pretty short-handed.
There's been a couple drops.
There's been a couple drops, but that's bound to happen.
Yes.
It's not like Cruz with the Giants dropping everything left and right.
No, he's missing guys. You're right.
Yeah, there's guys wide open, and he's absolutely missing them. And it is concerning. I can only imagine what like a true top-notch quarterback like the Drew Brees, Peyton Manning's of the world, what they would do under the Chip Kelly offense. They would probably throw for 400 yards every game.
Yeah, and I've been a full supporter since day one. I liked him. I wanted him as a starter to start last year. Although I did think that Vic played so well in the preseason, he earned the job. But I've been a Foles guy, and last year I was rubbing it in people's face, and this year I have to slow my roll a little bit. I'm not too worried. He's not what he was last year, but I also don't think he is what he's been so far this year. I think he's somewhere in between. Keep in mind, we're talking about him like this, and he's thrown for over 300 yards twice.
A lot of that due to Darren Sproles.
But that's
a lot
offense.
of yards after catch.
That's the offense.
Passes.
You know what? Let him throw the screens. Let him throw the short ones. But you made a very good point. The open receivers. This offense is working. There's guys wide open down the field. You see Nick Foles doing the double pump a couple times, and then you watch the replay, and it turns out the guy he was pumping at was wide open.
Yeah.
He threw behind the guy, which he never did last year.
Week 1 against Jacksonville, he was particularly susceptible to those double pumps. He was holding the ball way too long in the pocket. I wrote an article about it on the site. And it was with guys that were open, and it is concerning.
I do think he'll be okay. I think he's fine to be a quarterback in this offense. Now, do I think that Nick Foles is the talented guy who, like Peyton Manning, goes to a 3-13 team and takes them to the playoffs? Do I think if Nick Foles went to any team, he would be putting up star numbers? No. But I think he's fine for this system. I do think he's going to have some really good games again. He's going to have some more 4-touchdown games like he did last year, just because all you have to be is kind of good to average and be able to do that in this system.
So when you got McCoy and Sproles back there making plays for you, it makes it a lot easier.
So I expect him to hit some more of these open guys, and I don't expect him to wait 8 seconds while he gets the ball knocked out of his hand. Not going to go 27 touchdowns to 2 interceptions this year, but I think he's fine to be the quarterback of this offense.
And I think the larger point is that the team, especially the offense as currently constructed, is good enough to win the Super Bowl. Defense has a lot of issues, so I'm not going to say that they're likely to win the Super Bowl this year. But the offense certainly is. And I think when you have a guy like Foles who can be the guy at the helm for your offense that would be good enough to win a Super Bowl, and you're paying him not top dollar like they are, and we've seen this with the whole thing with Russell Wilson last year, how the Seahawks were able to build such a great team around him because of the relative value they got at the quarterback position for not paying somebody like Joe Flacco $20 million and tying up all your salary cap on that position. So I think he's good enough to get the job done. I don't think they should go out and give him a Jay Cutler contract down the road just because he's had success with the team, because I think that they could draft somebody and they could, pick somebody else, a free agent that could put up similar numbers.
Well, they're in a bad spot though, because this is the last year where I think the fans are going to allow it to be a rebuilding year.
Yeah.
Like if they don't win a Super Bowl this year, if they don't go to the Super Bowl, it's okay. It's still Chip Kelly's second year. Can you really go into year 3 with a rookie quarterback? So it's really gonna. I think the team kind of needs him to step up a little bit. And you know what? If he can just hit these open receivers, he's going to throw for 350, 400 yards a game.
Yeah, and when it comes down to it, everybody's so worried about Foles. The Eagles have still had one of the best offenses in the NFL, and they're 2-0.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a little concerning, but it's not the worst problem in the world to have right now. There's plenty of teams out there that wish that their quarterback throwing for 300 yards back-to-back weeks, but maybe being a little inaccurate is a huge problem. All right, so thanks for Platic at KMAX732 for that question. Dan, you had one other one?
I do. This comes from Shay in Irving, at Shay in Irving on Twitter. He's a sports gambler, entertaining guy to follow, good guy to talk to sports about. I asked for questions, and he says, I want to know how the Eagles are going to stop the unstoppable in Week 13. So, of course, my first thought was he must mean Game 13, which is when the Eagles play Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks.
Definitely a tough matchup down the road. What are they going to do?
This guy is a Cowboy fan. He was referring to Week 13, Thanksgiving Day in Dallas.
So how are they going to stop the Cowboys? Show up. That's the best strategy, I would think.
Let me tell you something. You looked good last week. The Cowboys did look good. They had a really good offensive game plan. Let's not forget who you are. DeMarco Murray, by then, is going to be hurt. He's not. You're going to have Joseph Randle as your starting running back at that point.
Mixing in some Lance Dunbar.
Maybe some Lance Dunbar to spare Joseph Randle. Tony Romo is going to be back to throwing the ball 40 times a game. And he's going to,
if his back holds up.
If his back holds up. If not, we'll face Brandon Weeden. And the Cowboys are going to end up with a couple more games like last week, and they're going to end up with a couple more games like Week 1. And they're going to finish 8-8 like they do every year.
I think it's going to be LaShawn McCoy chomping on a turkey leg.
I think it's going to be LaShawn McCoy chomping on the turkey leg. Maybe a little Nick Foles in there, too.
Yeah, Sproles,
So how are the Eagles going to stop the unstoppable Week 13? They're going to show up, and in front of a national audience on Thanksgiving, they're going to put up at 40-plus and win that game in a very fun for Philly fans fashion.
Yeah, not too often we get a little Thanksgiving Eagles action.
So remember how close Matt McGloin came to beating them on Thanksgiving last year in Dallas.
Yeah. So as badly, and I'm using air quotes. I know it's a podcast. I'm using air quotes here. As badly as Nick Foles has played, he's still light years ahead of Matt McGloin. So I'm not worried about it.
And let me tell you something. I'll admit that if Dallas actually sticks to that game plan they had last week, they're a decent team. I was thinking maybe 5-11 after week 1. But if they actually stick to that game plan and keep running the ball, and DeMarco Murray actually stays healthy, and that keeps the defense off the field, they're going to win a few more games. So I'm not going to be a complete Dallas hater. That was very impressive. But Jason Garrett, like I said earlier, a leopard doesn't change his spots. He's been there for years. They've always won for years when they run the ball, and they've never stuck to it.
Yeah, and they do have one of the best offensive lines in the league. They've used a couple first-round picks recently to help bolster that line. But, yeah, we'll see if they stick with that strategy. It worked for them against the Titans in Week 2, so we'll see going forward. All right, so that concludes the Week 3 podcast. A lot of games on the slate, so hopefully can help correct that year-to-date record and make some money for you guys. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Good luck.